We're about to go on a journey from Knossos to Athens. In this journey, we'll visit some of the great sites of ancient Greece. Those places which allow us to see the important changes within this ancient land. To discover this rich history, we'll begin our journey at the site of Knossos on the island of Crete. We'll then move on to the Aegean island of Santorini before crossing over to the Peloponnese. Our journey will end in Athens, the capital of modern Greece and the most spectacular of the ancient sites. The period of history we are concerned with can be divided into four major sections: the Minoan period, the Mycenaean period, the Iron Age, and the Classical period. By looking at these major periods, we'll see both the foundations and the incredible achievements of ancient Greece, achievements which have lasted thousands of years. We don't have to look far in our own cities to find little reminders of ancient Greece. We are governed by a democracy and entertained in theatres. The architecture of our cities and even our public sculptures are full of Greek influences. These figures illustrate a popular myth of ancient Greece, a myth which reaches back to the Minoan period. They show the Athenian hero Theseus killing the Minotaur, a ferocious creature, half man, half bull. The Minotaur had been imprisoned in a maze of rooms beneath the Palace of Knossos, and Theseus was able to stop forever its appetite for the flesh of young men and women.
This myth was later Greeks' interpretation of their own ancient history. The Minoan period, to classical Greeks, was as far back in time as King Arthur is to us. And just as we have myths of King Arthur with magic swords and sorcerers to colour our history, the ancient Greeks used myth to help fill in the gaps of their knowledge. But, just like King Arthur, many myths are based on fact.
To sort the myth from the fact, archaeological work for many years has focused on the ruins of the Palace of Knossos and the people who lived here, the Minoans. Minoan civilization was centered on the island of Crete, and across the island, palaces and towns dating to this period have been uncovered. Of all these sites, the largest and most complex is to be found at Knossos. The ruins of Knossos seem very complete today, but they were not found like this. The founder of the excavations here, Sir Arthur Evans, rebuilt and conserved as he excavated. The result is a mixture of interpretations made by Evans and reality. But the reconstruction does help us to imagine how the palace once looked. This artist's reconstruction shows the site at its peak, when Knossos was like a small city, a vast complex of rooms and corridors built around a central court or square. This elaborate design most likely gave rise to the story that the Minotaur lived beneath this palace in a maze. Surrounding the central court are apartments, in places reconstructed to the original height, and storerooms, still full of the giant jars which once held the community's wealth. Some rooms were for religion, some for leisure, and many for administration. Archaeologists have uncovered an impressive drainage system, and on many of the walls, beautiful painted frescoes were found. In one famous fresco, we see the Minoan sport of bull leaping, where athletes leapt over the backs of charging bulls. As this sport placed human against bull, it was most likely the beginning of the Minotaur myth. Half man, half bull. In such ways do myths grow. To the north of Knossos is the island of Santorini, and here archaeologists have discovered a different type of Minoan settlement. In the year 1524 BC, a gigantic volcanic explosion literally blew this island apart. What is now sea was once the centre of the island. Settlements near here were utterly destroyed, and many people think this is the beginning of the Atlantis myth, a civilization disappearing beneath the waves. On the other side of the island, at Akrotiri, is an ancient Minoan settlement which was buried by ash and pumice from the eruption. Like the Roman city of Pompeii, the volcanic explosion of Santorini presents us with a snapshot of a town, frozen in time. The people of this town had time to flee the island before the major eruption, but they left behind their homes and many of their possessions. It is now possible to walk the same streets as the Minoans did around 3,500 years ago. Houses survive to the second story. Pots rest where they were last placed. Stairs lead to upper floors which have now vanished. Only a small amount of reconstruction has been carried out here, and it is easy to imagine how the town once looked. A royal residence has not yet been found here, and it seems that Akrotiri is the remains of an ordinary town. Inside these windows lived the merchants, workers, and artists who supplied wealth and commerce to the first major civilization in Greece, the Minoans.
There are many things that we do not understand about Minoan society. One frustrating thing is that we cannot read their script, and until we decipher their writing, we'll never know what language they spoke. The first society that we can be sure spoke Greek were the Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans conquered Knossos and went on to dominate Greece. Today, the language used in the popular press, like in this newspaper here, owes its origins back to the Mycenaean period, 3,000 years ago.
The centre of the Mycenaean world was in the Peloponnese in the south of Greece. A site excavated here last century was the fortress of Mycenae, probably the most powerful of the Mycenaean settlements, and the place which gave its name to the period. What control Mycenae had over other towns like Tiryns and Pylos is still unclear, but together the people of these settlements laid the foundations of later Greek history. Like the Minoans before them, the palace was the centre of Mycenaean society. Palaces like this one at Pylos provided administration to the district and trade with other regions, bringing in wealth. The Mycenaean ruling class prided themselves as warriors, and a king's time was divided between religion, commerce, justice, and war. Legend tells us that the ruler here at Pylos was the wise King Nestor. We know about Nestor because he took part in the most famous battle of the ancient world, the Siege of Troy. This battle is remembered today because it forms the backbone of Europe's earliest epic tale. Originally sung by a blind poet named Homer, this story tells of a 10-year battle by Mycenaean Greeks to capture the city of Troy, a victory which only came with the trick of the wooden horse. It was this story, thousands of years old, which prompted archaeologists in 1939 to search for Nestor's palace at Pylos. Here they certainly found a palace, but no evidence that a king named Nestor actually lived here. The entrance to the main building is through a series of rooms or vestibules. These all lead to the throne room, where the king would have sat beside a large circular fireplace. Beside where the king's throne once stood is a shallow channel, perhaps used to carry the king's offering of wine to the gods. You cannot help but imagine Nestor pouring wine here before leaving for Troy. Surrounding this central area are storerooms, with the storage jars still in place. Jars which would have once held the wealth of the king, in the form of grain and olive oil. Elsewhere are rooms for keeping the clay tablets on which the palace workers wrote their administration records. And even bathrooms, the clay bathtub still in place. The fortress of Tiryns is a different type of Mycenaean site. At Tiryns there is no escaping the fact that warfare must have been a part of life. Homer called this place Tiryns of the mighty walls, and even today we can see what he meant. Its walls, which are many meters thick, protected a palace, storerooms, and a small town. Just who the people here were trying to keep out is a mystery. They may have been other Mycenaean Greeks, or perhaps outsiders. Whatever the threat was, the engineers at Tiryns built a sophisticated fortress, still the best example of its type. Near Tiryns is another more famous settlement, Mycenae. When later Greeks saw the walls of Mycenae, they could not believe that they had been built by men. Surely only gods could fit the stones together so well. These walls protected the Lion Gate, the main entrance to the town. The carving of the two lions is thought to be the oldest monumental sculpture in Europe, and it was probably the royal badge or emblem of Mycenae. Just beyond the Lion Gate is the Royal Grave Circle, excavated in 1876 by archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann. At the bottom of these shafts, Schliemann discovered the tombs of the early kings of Mycenae. Among the incredible artifacts which were left with the bodies was this gold mask, taken directly from the king's features after his death. It is rare to see the face of a king 3,500 years old, and this mask, with many other pieces, confirm Homer's description of Mycenae, rich in gold. At the very top of the site, overlooking the plain of Argos, is the king's palace. From these rooms, the king of Mycenae would have held the other Mycenaean towns in a loose confederation, united by language, custom, marriage, and religion, but each suspicious of the other. Around 3,000 years ago, the Mycenaeans excavated this staircase to reach water 18 meters underground. This project was just part of a larger job to strengthen the fortifications of the town. As well as strong walls to keep an enemy out, access to water was essential, and the people here made sure that they could always fetch it at the bottom of these stairs, no matter what happened. But the wealth and prestige of Mycenae could not save it in the end. Towards 1100 BC, a wave of disruption swept most of the Mycenaean world, destroying forever the old centers of power, Mycenae included.
The reasons for the collapse of Mycenaean civilization is one of the great mysteries of ancient Greece, and even today scholars cannot agree on what caused it. At this point, Greece goes into a period of reversal, and as incredible as it sounds, people lost the ability to write, prosperity disappeared, and Greece breaks up into small groups of people based around individual settlements. Gradually, these settlements grew into towns, and after about 400 years, prosperity returns. Not in the old centres like Mycenae, but in places like Corinth, artists begin to produce art which shows new life and new influences. This piece here, for example, with its sirens, lions, and sphinxes, shows influence from the Assyrian Empire, far to the east. As these influences flooded into Greece, the region begins to emerge from the shadows.
By 700 BC, the concept of the city-state was entrenched across Greece. Because of isolation, Greek cities grew to be independent of each other, each city controlling the immediate region around it, so that Greece became a patchwork of dozens of little states. It was not long before these city-states expanded beyond their traditional boundaries. In the Peloponnese, two cities, Sparta and Corinth, are good examples of how they did this in different ways. It was during this time, the Iron Age, that Sparta established its reputation as a major centre for the arts and politics. It achieved this status through conquest, not of a foreign land, but of neighbouring Greeks. On the other side of the Taygetos Mountains, which loom over Sparta, is the region of Messenia. This rich land was captured by the Spartans, and the original inhabitants, Greeks like themselves, were held as slaves, or helots. These slaves worked the fields, producing wealth for the city of Sparta. Freed from having to work, the Spartans concentrated on military training, producing an army which has remained legendary to this day. Unlike Sparta, the city of Corinth expanded overseas by establishing a network of colonies. The wealth from the colonies enabled the Corinthians to build a beautiful city and to maintain a large navy. They used the sea as a highway to introduce new ideas into their society and to expand beyond the borders of Greece. Corinth looked outwards, and it became a cosmopolitan and vibrant place. On the other hand, Sparta, fearful of a slave revolt, turned inwards and became increasingly conservative and militaristic. These cities, very different but bound together by treaties of friendship, were to have an incredible effect on the next 100 years of Greek history.
The type of columns used in this building are known as Corinthian columns, and they show us that the legacy of ancient Greece is still here with us today. But the reason that we sometimes build like this is not so much because of Corinth, but because of one other city, Athens. If there is any city which best typifies that period of classical Greece, with its marvellous art and literature, its philosophy and science, it is Athens. The spark which ignited this incredible brilliance was a severe threat to the safety of all Greeks. A threat which saw for a brief time the Greeks working together, and a threat which was to propel Athens to amazing heights.
In 490 BC, the Persian king Darius, ruler of the most powerful empire in the region, set out to invade and conquer Greece. Crossing the Aegean, he landed his troops on the plain of Marathon and prepared for battle. To stop the invasion, the Athenian army quickly moved into position. In the battle which followed, the Persians were defeated, the Athenians only losing 191 soldiers. It was a staggering victory, and this mound was erected over the Athenian dead to commemorate their deeds. But that was not the end of it. 10 years later, in 480 BC, Darius's son, Xerxes, launched the largest invasion force ever. The Persian army swept all before them as they advanced into the Greek heartland. They had their revenge for Marathon by capturing Athens and burning it to the ground. But one final victory was needed by the Persians to secure their conquest: the destruction of the Greek navy, stationed near the island of Salamis. In this narrow stretch of water, the Athenian commander Themistocles took control of events and lured the Persian navy into an ambush. In a do-or-die effort, the Greek navy defeated the Persians and shattered any dream Xerxes had for conquest. Greece was at last safe, and Athens was established as one of the leaders of the Greek world. With these victories, the power and prestige of the Athenians grew until an empire was formed which included many Greek cities and Aegean islands. From all corners of the empire, goods entered Athens via the harbour, Piraeus, still a major port for the city. This stranglehold on the trade of Greece gave Athens the wealth to spend large amounts of money on her navy, public buildings, and political system. In the marketplace of Athens, the Agora, these goods were bought and sold. People exchanged news and discussed politics. Slaves from Scythia brushed shoulders with ambassadors from Italy. Fish for sale glistened in the sun, and the sweet smell of incense drifted from nearby temples. Above the Agora tower the cliffs of the Acropolis, and on top of the Acropolis is the greatest achievement of ancient Athens, the Parthenon, the most beautiful and superbly designed of all the Greek temples. Also overlooking the ancient city was the assembly area for the Athenians, the Pnyx. Here the very early forms of democracy were tried and tested. The Athenians took great pride in their democracy, and they must have been satisfied as they watched their city prosper around them. But with growth and power comes arrogance and the suspicion of others. As Athens expanded, the older centres of Sparta and Corinth became jealous and scared of the new power of Athens. A fear which quickly became conflict when Sparta and Corinth declared war on Athens. The Athenians, under the advice of their great leader, Pericles, were prepared to fight it out with their enemies, fellow Greeks like themselves. And all memories of cooperation during the Persian Wars were forgotten. Greece was plunged into a war, now known as the Peloponnesian War, which was to last 27 years. By the year 404 BC, this war had exhausted Greece. Although Sparta and Corinth had defeated Athens, they were too weak to take advantage of their victory. It was a war that nobody in the end won. As quickly as the classical period had flowered with the Persian invasions, this war broke the spell, and the sheer brilliance of Greece in the 5th century BC begins to fade. As time passed, the education and the style of the Greeks ensured that their influence continued long after the classical period. In cities, ancient and modern, across the world, ideas from ancient Greece have been copied, modified, and incorporated. A process which even continues to flourish today, 2,500 years later.